Okay, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Leveraging the Power of Synergies webinar. I will be the moderator for today. My name is Michelle Glover. I'm the CEO of Journey Unlimited. And at Journey Unlimited, it is all about helping individuals and businesses discover their purpose, understand their why, and then create a strategic plan to actually live it out. So it's one thing to say, I have a purpose, I know what it is, but then how do you start to live it in the workplace? And so I'm so excited to be hosting today's webinar with Dr. Mary Ritz and Dr. Mayor Toussaint to talk about this power of leveraging synergies. And so really when we look at 2020, and you think about this year, what's one word that comes to mind when you think about your business and how it has performed during the year 2020? I think if we've learned anything, and you can put that in the chat, the one word to describe how 2020 has been on your business or even you personally. I think if we've learned anything from this year, we've learned the vulnerabilities in our operations. They have truly been exposed. And so some organizations, this has been a swift shift and pivot to perform in 2020. With others, it's left them exposed. And so these are some of the questions that we're going to be talking about today. How do you keep business momentum? How do you continue to build organizations that are resilient and future ready? And then most importantly, as you look into the next 10 years, right? What are some strategies that you can leverage to sustain your business performance? So a very interactive discussion that we will be having today with our facilitators. Dr. Mayor Ritz is the owner and founder of Amenta International, and Dr. Mayor Toussaint, who is the founder and executive director for Financium School of Business. So I want to have them do a quick introduction to themselves. Would love for you all to hear for them first, and then we'll go onto the remainder of the presentation. So Dr. Mayor Ritz, you could make sure your line is unmuted. Would love to hear a little bit about you.
Thank you, Michelle. What a privilege to have you on this triad discussion today. And Dr. Mayor, what a privilege to have you too. I know you'll have an opportunity to introduce yourself. And everybody, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Canada, Atlanta, United States, please welcome. As Michelle said, I am the owner and founder of Amenta International. Before I even go into what I do, I'd like to explain why I do what I do. What is the why? I believe that organizations can be successful and perform very well, mainly depending on one thing, it's people. I believe that leaders and teams must be able to work in cohesion so that they can actually serve and manage their customer in a very sustainable way. So what is it that what I do? I provide training and professional development solutions around customer management, around leadership, and around the teamwork. How do I do it? I provide training solutions. I provide masterminds, speaking engagements, and consulting services. I've had the privilege of working in 6 different countries. In fact, my business started right there in Johannesburg, South Africa. I worked in Zimbabwe, Zambia, Tanzania. I work in Canada, and I've had the privilege of working in about 15 states here in America. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to have you, Michelle, and Dr. Mayor to be having this discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, let me take over. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Mary. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who took their time and joined us. We really are honored to have you from all over the world to have this conversation. My name is Mayor Toussaint. I'm based in Pretoria, Johannesburg. Coincidentally, I really want to start with what is the purpose? Why do I do what I do? Firstly, I have an unwavering belief in people performance. I have an unwavering belief in people capacity and capability, most especially those who don't have a mouth to speak for themselves. So that is the why. And how I do that, I provide executive coaching to the C-suite for small and medium enterprises on how do we position the organizations, most especially the ones that are facing closure or that needs turnaround. The companies that are doomed to fail, that's where I come in and assist either the owners or executives on how do we find out what's gone wrong in the organization and we reposition this organization for the better. In short, really what one does is to build people who build organizations that sustain value, provide sustainable value and livelihood. And building people, there are really 3 P's that I want to bring to our attention is through purpose, finding the purpose from all of us, because it's only through purpose we can really do what we do and we enjoy it. Through performance, there is no business and no reason why we cannot propel ourselves individually and collectively in organizations for performance. And finally, through paycheck or finances, if it is working, it needs to sustain and create sustainable value. And I'm also very involved in teaching in various higher education institutions where I promote students in their postgraduate studies, ranging from leadership, finance, and other related subjects. So, and thank you again for being here. And I'm excited. I'm sure we're going to excite each other for the coming 60 or so minutes. Thank you.
Thank you both, Dr. Mayor Ritz and Dr. Mayor Toussaint, for those introductions. And as we go on to today, and I love how we're talking about this triad, these synergies, and I'm going to go ahead and click through. Oops, go back here. So what we're going to be talking about today is how we can advance the business future by building its competitive edge through this triad that you're going to hear more about today, which is customer management, financial intelligence, and leadership. So, in the waiting room. So we will discuss, what leaders, what teams, what organizations, and what business owners can do to advance really the customer management and financial intelligence to help build business sustainability. So it's a key word I want us to focus on is how do we sustain our businesses into the future? So there are some critical questions that we're going to be talking about today, which is really, I'd say, shaping the agenda. It's what can we learn from 2020? How can we reorganize for the future? What form or shape of leadership is needed for the future? How can organizations drive customer management? And then the other key pillar we're going to talk about today is what are the financial sustainability implications that we have moving into the future? So while this is going to be the agenda and shape the conversation today, please know that we want this to be interactive. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. If there's any comments that you want to share, please feel free to leverage the chat for that as well, because we're going to be sharing a lot of information with you today, but we want to make sure that any questions that you have are also addressed. So as I mentioned before, these are the critical questions. And even as you're going to hear from these experts on the responses to the critical questions, I also want you to formulate, how can I apply this to my organizations? What did I learn from 2020? How can I begin to reorganize for the future? So think of your leadership currently. You see where you are currently. And then as they talk about what's needed for the future, think, where are there gaps in your leadership? And the great thing is we've got these subject matter experts who will help answer those questions if you identify some of those gaps. When you look at the customer management in your organization, thinking of where you are currently, and as they provide their expertise on how organizations should drive customer management, again, this is an opportunity for you to begin to identify those gaps. And then finally, as we talk about the financial sustainability and the implications, look at your financial platform within your organization and look at where there be opportunities to really leverage and apply what is shared today. because I say this webinar is going to provide you a wealth of information, but it really only, is going to be transformational if you apply what you've learned today. So these are the critical questions that we're going to talk about, but make sure you're always thinking, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my organization? And how can I apply it into the future? So let's talk about, as I talked about, the first question we're going to discuss today are, what did we learn from 2020? So go ahead and, there we go. So let's look at the general view of the year of 2020 and how can we professionally and personally prepare for 2021 and beyond. And I'd love for Mayor, for you to first tackle this question.
Thank you, Michelle. I think if we all pause at this moment and reflect on the great plans that were put in place for 2020 and how the year started. And in some areas of parts of the world, it was dubbed as 20plenty. And much was expected throughout the year, professionally and individually. And the pandemic kicked in. It really shook the world beyond imagination. The norm as we knew it personally and professionally was totally flipped. Now, what has happened in that, as one reflects on the 2020 and what in my mind became one of the critical lessons is that the time is over for us having pure plans that are developed and ready to be implemented. And we really need to start to, as I call it, compose as we sing. That is the first thing that in my mind 2020 has done, because as we have observed throughout the world, in addition to many lives being lost, livelihoods have been wiped from many organizations. Those of you, I mean, if you've got an opportunity to go through the shopping malls or the shopping complexes, you realize that 2020, not only that it's going to change how we view business moving forward, but it's going to obliterate, in the lack of a better way, the business as we knew it. Now, in addition to that, the numbers of people who not only lost their livelihoods, but became unemployed globally, it has skyrocketed. Now, the sad story is that this is just the beginning. What we are seeing is just the tip of an iceberg. The worst is still going to come because, as many parts of the world are aware, from the health perspective point of view, the pandemic has just came back, taking the second wave. So this translates to organizations to say, it is going to get worse before it gets better. So from personal aspirations point of view, the view has been, there have been many areas of disappointments, but with every challenge, there have been also areas of opportunity. And I mean, on a very lighter note, it could be the conversation we're having today. If we wanted to have this 2018, 2017, we'll have wanted to arrange a conference, a workshop, where all of us will have to get together in one room. So in the midst of the challenges that have been brought by the hardships of the year that started as a medical problem or health problem, and it's really now a social and an economic challenge, it brings with us many opportunities for us to stand back and reflect on our future aspirations individually and organizationally. And let me pause there to allow Mary to also come in. When we really look at what has happened, where are we, and how do we think to move beyond the 2021? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mayor. And Michelle, you can call me Mary, no need for the formal title. Mayor has really given us a foundation of what we think or how we review 2020. In my mind, 2020 has got the upside and the downside. So Mayor ended up on the triad of the challenges, the socio or the social, and then the health challenges. It's a perfect storm. So in the United States, we have seen it. The social unrest, what's happening on the streets, but at the same time, people losing work. They are predicting that bankruptcies are bound to go up in 2021. So all this, it's almost like a rug was pulled under us. Though we were getting ready, we were digitalizing and we're transforming, artificial intelligence had become a part of our vocabulary. Everything became accelerated. Think about health issues now, mental health issues that are going on. Young kids under the ages, high school going kids are being affected by depression and isolation because they're working from home. So 2020 on the downside has really challenged us economically, professionally, and personally. But let's now look at the upside. Trends have accelerated. In the United States, there is a business startup boom as we speak. And now there's what we call destructive an economy, which means that we are now gearing to go into an economy that we could never think of. Everybody is now going online and creating their presence. So 2020, as much as it had a downside, but it had opportunity. It taught us to pivot quickly and to make decisions quickly. It taught us to make priorities and to prioritize. It taught us to be closer and to sense our life's purpose and meaning. Now we are considering the social context and how people act and behave. I'll leave it there, Michelle.
Yeah, no, this was great dialogue and great feedback that you all shared, both of you, in terms of looking at our businesses, you know, and the challenges, but also looking at some of the opportunities that we can have in terms of this pivot and operating and moving quickly. But also I appreciate how you all shared in the context of overall, what does this mean socially? What are some of the social impacts that have happened this year, looking at our health, both our mental and physical health. And so also looking at our relationships and understanding that, and both of you all started your introductions with your why. And I shared even with my business, it's all about purpose, alignment, and understanding, helping people understand their why. But that theme of purpose and, you know, understanding our why and what am I meant to do has really been in question now, where people are starting to take time to be more reflective. So some of the things that we're seeing in the chat, as you guys have shared, and one of the questions asked was, what do they see as the lessons learned, or, you know, they're responsive to 2020. And it's been, you know, this is the new norm. It's been a transformative year. So either adapt or get left behind. So thinking outside the box, balancing the health and safety, balancing of health, safety, and production. And so we all need to develop an entrepreneurial mindset, even if we don't have a business. So the world is now digital. So those are some of the things that we've been hearing in the chat, and would love to hear from more of you on your view of 2020, as well as what has been your biggest lesson learned for the year of 2020.
And Michelle,
Yes.
if I could come in there, I mean, one of the comments in the chat says, many individuals, organizations are adopting a wait and see.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am of the view that this is a fertile opportunity not to wait and see. If you look at history of many of at least successful organizations through the business cyclicality, it's during the depression and the downside of the economy where greatest ideas that will shape the future begin. And really, as a side throw, I would like to say, for anybody who's still standing by the curb and trying to figure out as a wait and see, this is the time to act on at least one thing, because it cannot get worse than it already is. So even if it fails, by just shifting it a little bit, it's a success. I just wanted to respond to that, to encourage all of us not to wait, but to create the future that it's going to be.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate, even as you talked about before, this is, this has been a challenge, but this also could really be opportunities. So I think all of us are now thinking of how can we think outside of the box during this time. So another critical question I want us to talk about are some of the leadership aspect of it. What are the questions for leadership that we need to remain resilient? So as we've seen from this pandemic, that businesses will continue to be challenged. So what does that mean for our leaders, our teams, our small business owners? And how are you going to adjust for 2021 and beyond to remain resilient? So let's talk about that from, how can we reorganize for the future? And Mary, would love to hear your perspective on this first.
Okay, great. So Michelle, as I say, even in my work, I always say everything starts and ends with leadership. So the leadership will drive the trajectory of our new story. So as part of the triad, as we're talking to leadership, we're talking to customer management and finance. But at the top of that triad is leadership. So how do you as a leader, and right now we're talking, yes, the visionary leader, but we're also talking the customer management leader, we're talking the product management leader. You as a leader, what can you do differently? Michelle, if you can go to the next slide, please. So there are 3 areas, and the next slide, please, Michelle. So there are 3 areas that we're looking at. So we believe that leaders must actually sculpt the trajectory and the future, to think outside the box, to think creatively, to go to places that they've never been before, and to start looking at the team, the products and the processes, and to relook at the business model. Can I have the next slide, please, Michelle? So from a leadership perspective, we have 3 strategies that we believe can prepare you for 2021 and beyond. The first one is actually adapting the innovation leadership style, which alludes that you begin to look at your business more than your products and services. Because if we start to look at products and services, I bet you Blockbusters will still be in business today. I bet you BlackBerry would be the smartest phone ever. So competing and only innovating around products and services is no longer adequate. So how else can you differentiate? How else can you bring in a sustainable competitive advantage? And some people then will allude to the fact that innovation is only for technology companies like Apple, Amazon, and all that. We now need to create a mindset of innovation. So statements like, we don't do that here. It's not part of our product portfolio. We've tried that before. It doesn't work. We have to now get rid of those statements and embrace the fact that anybody can be innovative. On that note, we need to develop our curiosity. As a leader, you gotta start to listen more and ask deeper questions for understanding. With that, you also create what I call the innovative spaces. So I know right now we're working away from home, we're working remotely. But even in that, how can you bring collaboration tools that can allow your teams to innovate? How can you as a leader actually come up with an innovation team on your ground or in your organization? But it doesn't mean that the innovation group or team only is responsible for that. How can you make innovation a part of the entire organization, so to speak? And then at this point, I want to leave Maya to speak to the collective leadership or even add on to the innovation.
Mhm. And before you do that, before we transition on, a great comment that's come into the chat that all businesses are digital. Leaner teams will cut it for small businesses, multi-skilled business owners. Collaborations will assist in cost savings for subject matter experts. So if there are any questions, please make sure you use the chat to answer those. But yes, would love to hear from Mayor on the collective leadership.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Mary, and thank you for the participants. What we have observed in 2020, the clarity of dichotomy of leadership realities. In my mind, it became very clear from ranging from decisiveness and to indecisiveness, from risk-taking leaders to risk-avoiding or risk-averse leadership. The real story that says the emperor is naked, the emperor has got no clothes. We've seen some leaders in the formal form of the word of leadership playing itself in 2020. We've also observed in leadership the struggling and battling with the concept of resource acquisition, resource allocation, utilization of those resources and capital, and the authenticity of leaders in accepting the scarcity of capital and resources in 2020. And from the leadership point of view, before I latch on to collective leadership, not as a role, but as a person, is having struggled and observed the concept that I mentioned before, and most especially of the scarcity of resources that needs to be equitably allocated for optimum performance. We have seen how some leaders were found wanting when the pandemic wreaked havoc in many parts of the world. And maybe this observation, it's a function of the earlier item I mentioned. It's about decisiveness. And it links in very well, Mary, with what you say, everything rises and falls with leadership. So what does this mean in these observations or behavioral observations of leaders in 2020? It means leadership, 2020 has brought to us, and this one need to take to the future, is that leadership is something that should be shared, that should be a collective contract, an agreement between those who are led and those who are leading. And as a matter of fact, sometimes to lead, you need to follow, to lead better. Because there are times as a leader where if you have gathered your team together, have a compelling vision, and dealing with shocks like 2020 has done, if you embrace the collective responsibility and shared leadership, and what I'm not mentioning here, glued together by trust, because where there's no trust, there's no team. Where I know that in my absence, my team is very much capable and willing to deliver, then this promotes shared leadership in attainment of the future and how we gather resources, in particular financial resources, because whether we like it or not, in 2020, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most resources second to life that has been put to test was the financial and capital resources. And when you embrace collective and shared leadership, this creates to us as individuals and teams and organizations ownership. Ownership in the sense that if I don't do it, who do I expect is going to do it? If I know that the company that I'm leading needs to be involved with the funding of the research of the vaccine, for an argument's sake, and I'm not putting in place the protocols and allocating the finances, I'm as much failing the society, not the organization, in a year like this. You're failing humanity in your human responsibility if you ignore sense of ownership in collective leadership. But again, I think what 2020 has done as far as leadership is concerned. We have seen how the globe got together and really fought a common enemy in a very true sense of reality, fought a common enemy where we broke down the sovereignty of nations and dealing with silos where the mentality of nationality is believing that they are better than others. So in the midst of the hardships of the year, leaders, either by a role or by competencies, broke the silos, broke the glasses, and got together for common good. And maybe this is why we sit in today all over the world where we're seeing a miracle where within a period of 8 months, which has never happened before, we have a vaccine, a research breakthrough that is already being administered. And I don't want to go to the politics of the vaccine. All I'm saying is breaking the silos, working together across nations, it's showing us the ability to do the otherwise unthinkable in the past. And before I let Mary come in, it also has taught us to really embrace each other, really leading authentically from our heart, from our souls, to really see the suffering and struggling of nations and individuals and organizations led to many of us to catapult your dependability as a leader and have your tentacles reaching far and near so that we can all come to the party, we can all participate as leaders and really be empathetic and be authentic in how we deal with each other from the leadership point of view. Thanks, Michelle.
Wow, these were great nuggets that were shared on leadership and some of the information on the chat, the need for technology, leadership in organizations, everything is on leadership's shoulders. And another point for now, and as well as we talk about the financials, building an emergency fund to soften, every hit. And so one of the things I would share also is that really 2020 has exposed good leadership. And it's also exposed poor leadership. And so where before you were kind of under the rug with your leadership and I loved how, I think it was Mary mentioned on, we relied on our products and services, but now what organizations are seeing are, do we have the right people on the bus to help us innovate for the future? Do we have the right leadership culture in our organization to help us sustain where we are now in 2020, as well as propel us into the future? And what organizations are realizing is that they don't. And so this was great information shared on some, the leadership that is needed for beyond, and an opportunity for all of us to do a pulse check on where we are versus where we would like to be. So I'm going to move on, Mary, unless you wanted to add anything else on leadership. I'm going to move on to the next slide.
Yes, Michelle, I'd like to add on to something.
Okay.
So Mary has eloquently put across how collaboration has worked globally. I mean, look here, Michelle, you and Mary are doing something, right? Collaboration across the seas. But I would like to speak to the manager on this platform today, and leader on this platform today, a team member on this platform today, and to say, how do you increase that collaboration and break down the silos? So you don't own anything in the organization, so to speak. It becomes a collective. What is the organization's purpose? How can you be a part of that so that you can help break the silos? So the fact that maybe the customer belongs to the customer service department is a myth, because that customer also belongs to the finance department, belongs to the HR department. How can we communicate? How can we come together to solve the problems? Not departmental problems, but organizational problems. That actually allows us to have a competitive advantage and to be more sustainable. Obviously, there is power in numbers, right? Okay. And then the one thing that I also just really want to emphasize, which Mayor has already touched on, is leading from the heart. So think about it, Michelle, and the rest of our audience and Mayor. 11% We've seen an increase of 11% suicides in the United States. There has been about 2,100 suicides in Japan alone in October. These same people that are having mental issues, suicidal thoughts, are coming to our offices and our workplaces. They are part of our workforce. So as leaders, we are compelled to show empathy, to be humble. So it's no longer just about our strategy, how eloquent we sound, how educated we are. We have to become human and put ourselves in our employees' shoes, in our teammates' shoes, so that we can start to operate our organizations from a purpose-driven perspective. It's no longer just about money. That's what I wanted to say, Michelle.
No, great points. The feedback that's come through is the
before you
narrative
come in-
gaps between functional departments. The organization is now fluid. As they say, customer belongs to everyone rather than just sales, which is actually a good transition as we move on to customer.
Michelle?
Oh,
Michelle?
yes. Mhm.
You know, I just wanted to add something there before Mary comes in. What we probably just brushed through quick, which it's critical in how we're going to transition to the real norm of the future. It's ethical leadership, or ethics in leadership, and ethical behavior in all of us. I mean, as a matter of fact, in the previous years, technological advancements, one of the things that it has done is we'll put all these fancy machines to find out if Michelle did come to work and did Michelle log into the work, blah, blah, blah. That's what happened. But in 2020, by default, we had to rely on your ethical and moral judgment to believe that wherever you are at any point in time, you will commit to delivering the value and the service that you intended to deliver. Now, that's for all of us here around the table. But leaders, in a formal sense of the way, have been put to test on how ethical in their conduct they really are. Are they walking the talk? Are we doing the things that we should be doing, whether somebody's watching or not? Because that's what leadership is about in ethical context. Doing what you ought to be doing, whether you're going to get the accolades or not. So I think we should not forget the value and the importance of ethical conduct and how many employees without any recognition have commit themselves. And this happened a lot in South Africa and many organizations having to use their personal resources when conducting organizational duties.
Mhm.
That's value of ethics and how we really commit to being a better society moving forward. I just wanted to touch on that before Mary comes in.
No, that was great, and a great note for all. And really, when we're talking about closing those gaps in leadership, and even if you realize from an individual leader or as a manager, there are gaps. The great thing is you've got these two experts of Mary and Mayor who are more than happy to support you on the leadership development in your organization. So you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to work in a silo, that we've got subject matter expert to support you. And so as we were transitioning over, we're talking about this customer management. And I appreciate, in the chat, Raymond mentioned that the customer belongs to everyone, not just sales, which is a great segue as Mary is going to talk to us about how organizations should drive customer management.
Great. So we've now just completed the first triad, leadership. So the leadership now is running, is innovative, is leading from the heart. What should they look for? Then we fall into the customer, who I believe is the most important asset of an organization. Under the customer management in my work, I look at three things. I look at customer centricity, which is a business model. And I'm going to dwell on that in a minute. But we also look at customer service and customer experience. So let me read out these names of companies. Borders. You remember the bookstore? right? We just talked about Kodak, Blockbuster. We've also mentioned that BlackBerry is no longer the smartest phone ever. I'm sorry if I'm offending somebody. How about the fax? You remember the fax? The fax machine, when it came in? I thought I was on top of technology when I learned how to maneuver that. Those products are no longer competitive. Those brands are extinct. What those brands did is what most brands today do. They are what we call product-centric organizations. So I'm going to give you a fact. 99% of organizations are product-centric. You are profitable if you are product-centric. I'm not going to shy away from that. Apple is a typical example, and now they're moving into customer centricity, but they've done well. But it has cracks, that product-centric model, because you can no longer compete on products only, because anybody can innovate. Anybody can copy your technology. So it leaves you exposed. So going into 2021 and before, and we are thinking of doing things that outside our box, that we are becoming creative. We are taking a different paradigm. We are now introducing a new business model. Our argument here is that we have to consider customer centricity. Customer centricity is not a philosophy. It's a business model that is built around the customer. So the whole entire engine of an organization focuses on that customer. So I'm going to give you some nuggets about customer centricity. That's going to challenge your paradigm, especially if you believe in the product centric. The product centric is a model that believes that I want to acquire as many as many customers as I can, and I'll treat them the same. On the other side, customer centricity says, no, I want to differentiate. Who is the most valuable and most profitable customer that I have? So the customer centricity focuses on what we call the 80-20. You know that rule. So 20% of my customers actually makes my business more sustainable. So you focus on those first, and you understand their needs, and you go and you strategize, and you align your products and services to suit that. That's one thing. So in a customer-centric organization, not all customers are equal. That could be quite challenging. On the other side, we don't define our markets or our organization by the products and services. We define it by what we call the market space. So in a product centricity, people push products, and according to how much products you are pushing, then you count your profitability. You reward people that are creating great products. In a customer-centric world, we are saying, don't define your market by products and services, but instead by what we call the market space and the desired outcome of the organization. The market space is where we create new opportunities. This is where Michelle and I would decide to go and do business with somebody in South Africa. And though we are professional development people, but we decide to do business with an insurance company. We are now expanding our collaboration, and we're finding opportunities in places that we could have not thought of, because we are now defining our businesses, not by our products, but by our customers' outcomes. So products and services become a means to an end. For an example, Google then, instead of calling Google a search engine, we call it an information finding. Discovery in South Africa, instead of calling it a motor insurance, we call it a great safe driving experience. So now the outcomes become what we satisfy our customers through. So with this customer centricity, Our whole idea is for our organizations now to think differently, because with customer centricity, that's where you gain sustainability. That's why we're no longer talking about borders and blockbusters, because they focus on products, not the outcome. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to quickly then say, how then do you make this happen? In a product-centric organization, you can still be customer-focused, you can still offer customer experience, but it's not as eloquent or as pronounced as in a customer-centric organization. So let's just touch on customer experience. So now that you are customer-centric, how then do you differentiate yourself through customer service or customer experience? You got to listen to the voice of the customer. Right now, 73% of customers are saying they're no longer willing to go out and engage in outside their home activities, which means that they're going to be interacting with us and your brand through the channels that you provide. Which means that as an organization, you have to prepare for a digital experience. So you take your multiple channels that you have, your social media, your LinkedIn, your email, your in-person, and you offer what we call the Omin presence, the Omin channel, which means that you aspire to provide seamless experiences and constant experiences through the Omin channel. And again, how do you do that? The voice of the customer is number one. Customer experience is defined by the person or the customer who is experiencing. The perception of the customer becomes your reality. So you can't stand there and say, I provide great customer service. What does the customer say? The voice of the customer right now, you have to collect it through your surveys, your reviews, focus groups, get to understand what's changing in their lifestyle. And then before we finish, you have to ensure that your team is well developed, trained to offer the experience. So train your employees, make sure that they understand the product and the services, ensure that they understand the needs of the organization so that you become a trusted brand. I want to leave it there because I know we are running out of time.
Thank you so much. Great information. I was taking notes. I hope you all were taking notes, because that has really blown most of our minds in how we approach our businesses. Because as you talked about that 99%, many of us are thinking product and services, selling product and services, but to really shift it to customers, being more customer centric, I'm sure there are some opportunities for us to look at. So myself as a business owner included, how can I be more customer centric? The great thing is, everyone who may be thinking as I am, kind of mind blown, I got to shift operations. You've got someone like Mary who is an expert in this, and I'll make sure her contact information is in the chat so you can connect with her for more information. So as we segue here is this last pillar here, we're going to talk about the financial intelligence. And when we look at, I'm just going to click on all of these, the pertinent financial sustainability implication. And so Mayor, as an expert in here, would love to hear your perspective on our financial intelligence, the last pillar of the triad.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Mary, for your insights. Let's just first start by what are finances, because finances are the ones that lead us to financial intelligence. Finances are money, as we want to use it. Let's use the simple language, money. Finances are both a strategic asset in an organization, but secondly, it's just a transaction tool. That's as simple as it is. Finances support the trajectory and the strategy of an organization. And before I get to the concept that I want to share with you on building the financial intelligence, I want to reflect, Mary, on the 80-20 principle that you use, that 80% of your revenue comes from the 20% of your customer base. And I want to link this to how do finances, how do you look at your financial models around that concept? Now, this is what it means. Your 80% that gives you 20% of your revenue. Generally, not all the times, generally, these are your price sensitive customers, high demand, you know, and how you nest this 80% that gives you 20% in whatever, either you give them sales here, discounts, you know, but from the financial sustainability point of view, do not over service the customer that is price sensitive. Now, let's go back. I am not saying do not provide service. I'm saying quality is a minimum requirement in any organization. Service is a minimum requirement. So if they want 10 bottles of water at $2, you give them 10 bottles of water at $2, a price sensitive. So from the financial perspective, that's how you think of allocating your resources. The flip side, the 20% that gives you the 80% of your revenue. Again, this is a generic observation from experience, but these are your quality sensitive clients. They're not concerned about price. What they're concerned about is quality of what you said you will provide at the highest, better level. There is nothing that is non-existent by today, but they choose, and that's the key word, customers choose to remain with you because of the experience and being focused on them. So how you allocate your financial resources around your 20% is going to be very critical. But again, let's go to how do we conceptualize building financial intelligence, or what are financial implications to making sure that we've got sustainable organizations in 2021 and moving forward. And I'd like to look, I'm not going to use any order, how we do our scenario planning, how we reorganize or build to reorganize structures for the future. How do we build resilience in organizations, financial resilience in organizations? And how do we embrace digital innovation? And how do we build teams? And maybe I want to start with the last one on the slide, or how do we rebuild teams? And maybe for this conversation, try and confine it to the financial skills that are otherwise sometimes not in abundance in many organizations. The reality is that we haven't picked up is that the CEOs of the future are not going to come from the financial sector. The CEOs of organizations of the future are going to come from marketing, mainly HR, because the hard skill of the future, it's not numbers anymore. The hard skills of the future are how you treat people. So it's going to be very critical how we monitor as organizations and as leaders the finance talent trends. Now, 10 years ago, being a chartered accountant was almost synonymous to being God in organizations. In 2020 and moving forward, we've got machines and platforms that can do what chartered accountants or financial accountants or certified accountants can do better, more precise, quicker. So the trends when you're looking for your financial skills is not how to create the data, but it's how to convert the knowledge into strategic conversations for building value in organizations. So it's going to be very critical how the finance talent trends are evolving. The second thing is we need to manage the current and emerging finance team skills. Now, put it differently, we need a cohort, a nice mixture of the old guard, in the lack of a better word, and a new guard in the mixture of your team, so that you've got a transition from the old with the agility of the new skills, the fearlessness, decisiveness of the young talent in finance skills. But most critically, it's also how you're going to retain that talent. Now, from the finance point of view, this happens across disciplines. You've got colleagues who say, pay me well, which has been the trend in the past, financial experts that are paid exorbitant amount of money. But moving forward, that is going to be use me well. Use me well enough and allow me space to go and create my financial freedom in other organizations. So how are we going to build team through upskilling, reskilling? We need to accept that the finance team of the future and individuals who need financial expertise in organizations are going to start to demand from us as leaders to say, I actually don't need to work here. I've got a skill that I can use in other different organizations to create sustainable future. Now, the scenario planning. What we should be asking ourselves is that our financial models, how agile are the variables that we use as inputs when we model for the future? Now, put it differently, and again, maybe using 2020, which is a very good case study for financial sustainability and scenario planning. Almost the entire world was caught off guard. Nobody ever imagined to put in our financial models a possibility or a likelihood of a massive destruction and disruption into our business models and organizations. Now, thank you, Michelle. So if we need to go back and relook at the variables that we are using as inputs when we project and forecast our models for the future. And maybe an advice will be, let's all make sure that we under forecast our revenues while we over forecast our expenses. Now, the second is how we reorganize our organizations. It's going to be very critical and maybe beyond the structure as far as people are concerned. It's also how do we structure the financial resources. Now, while many organizations or leaders are going to be tempted to focus on the bottom line, we can use triple bottom line if you so wish, but allow me for now to just use the financial bottom line. Maybe this is the time not to push the bottom line. It's the time to relook at how we reorganize our financial allocation and rather reinvest in different sustainable models for organizations rather than having a good-looking financial statement at the end of the year. And this is going to be very critical when we look at the things that we've been doing throughout the year. Many organizations, by force, had to plan on a weekly basis because the cost structure just changed, just got out of hand. To oblige with the regulatory requirements, it meant a massive amount of money needed to be diverted for other projects into resourcing the compliance. These are finances. So I'm saying we need to match the unexpected financial allocations that we had to endure during the year. And it's not going to matter to have a very good looking bottom line, but it's going to matter if we invest these resources into the futures from near now to what's going to happen next year and years to come. We need to build organizations that are resilient, financially resilient. Now, in the past, and this happens mainly in financial institutions, insurance institutions, and medical aid institutions. I cannot remember what you call it in the United States and Canada. But an era it's gone where we aim for improving the reserves of organizations. This is about a high time where we consciously ask ourselves of the reserves that we have, how much portion of these reserves are we prepared to set aside for experimentation, for financial experimentation, business model experimentation, because it's only through research and development in organizations we will at least test and retest how the future will be like. And you see how this links in very well, how we do a scenario planning. So we need to build resilience through research and development, through being prepared to fail and losing money. I'm saying this cautiously, losing money in the process of creating value. And lastly, 2020 just forced us and reminded us that we are living in the era of digital reality. And Mary, that fact, it was as good as a landline when you receive it. But what we need to be asking ourselves is how do we embrace digital reality in making sure that we expand and leverage the competencies of digital reality in either repositioning organizations financially or spinning off the current massive organizations to allow for a rebirth of new organizations. It's a lot that you can go about, but let me pause there to allow for the participants to also engage us in conversations. Let me stop there. We can go on and on and on how we create financial sustainability. Thank you.
Great information. And I know in the interest of time, if you do have questions, make sure you ask them in the chat. So one of the questions was, is the future, as you talked about the digital innovation, the future CEO might be the chief information officers. What do you think about that? And then also someone said the agile financial management sounds interesting. So I know there you could probably talk longer on that. So I put your website in the chat as well. So what do you think about it, that in terms of, the future CEOs may be the future chief information officers?
Thank you. Look, that's very much a reality. Let's just go back and maybe back my opinion. A decade or 2 decades before, the investment to build your wealth, you needed to be in real estate in the main, and then go to stock and sort of goes on. In 2020, even in the past 5 years, the real estate is in digital economy. The real estate of the future, it's information. So the companies of the future will not be measured by the number of individuals who work in the organization, but it's the amount of information that they can process and make sensible decision making and collaborate and share that information. So as much as I've put my head on the block and said the CEO of the future will be from the chief people's officer, it might as well be they will run together as the chief information officer, because the real estate of the future is in data, it's in information, it's how we manipulate, and we own that. So I agree with that.
Great, thank you. And so I'll make sure I include that information in the chat. So as we're wrapping up here, there were so many nuggets and gems that were shared during this time with Mary and Mayor. So what I'm going to do first is launch a poll. We would love to hear your feedback on your thoughts on the event and anything you'd like to share. So a very brief survey that you should now have access to. So again, make sure that you complete the survey, because again, we would love to hear from you. Now, also, as we're going to transition to the webinar takeaways from our experts, I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What are some of the takeaways that you gleaned from this webinar on leveraging the power of synergy? So what are maybe 1 or 2 key takeaways that you have learned from today's activity or today's webinar? So as you all are doing the survey and putting that information in the chat, I will send it over to Mary if you want to share the webinar takeaways for the group and some of the key points you want them to stay connected with from today's session.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Mia. This has been great, at least from our point of view. So we wait for the audience to let us know. The one thing, though, that I would like to just emphasize is this whole notion of customer centricity. And the reason why we talked about the synergies. So the customer-centric model argues for the customer, it argues for leadership, it argues for the financial component, it argues for HR, it argues for processes and systems and all the channels. So it's an engine. What we've just done today is to take the 3 triad and to say, even if you choose not to be customer centric and if you choose to be product centric, but at least focus on the customer, let your leaders be innovative, let them be creative, let them be available, let them lead ethically. And then Mayor kind of like gave us the financial benefit of doing all these things, because we are in business because we're trying to be sustainable in the long term. So this whole synergy it works together. It's like a system. So you have to connect the parts so that you can leverage the benefits. So try and not to treat things in isolation, but instead take what we call the systems thinking perspective. So this is what Mayor Michelle and I tried to pull together for this particular webinar, to say, how do you take these resources, these strategies, and actually build resilience as business sustainability? On that note, I just want to highlight, and I'll take the first two takeaway webinars and I'll leave the other two to Mayor. So lead from the heart and connect with the people. So again, for me, as I said before, my organizations looks at the human element of an organization, and that starts off with leadership. So how do you show empathy? How do you create relationships with people? How do you draw empathy for that mother who is trying to juggle remote work with 3 kids that are being homeschooled? At the same time, how do you show empathy and emotional intelligence for an employee who is now working remotely and feels that they're alone and they're not collaborating adequately? So how can we lead from the heart? How can your organization not just focus on business performance only in terms of finances, and how do you make a difference in the social context? And then number 2, how do you care for your customers? So you can win even if you decide to be product centric. The only thing is that you're at risk because somebody is gonna duplicate your product and services. But even under a product-centric organization, you can still provide great customer experience and great customer service, because it's all about the customer if we're talking about finance. In a customer-centric model, understand that the 20% are your most valuable and they deserve to be treated quite differently. And lastly, focus on that voice of the customer. What are they saying? Not what do you think they're saying? And then how do you take that feedback and actually translate it into workable strategies to satisfy your customers in the long term?
Thanks, Mary. Let me just touch on the last 2. You know, one of the things that I do when I'm not dealing with the C-suite and organizations, I teach finance to kids, age of 8 to 14 mainly. I'm mentioning that because teaching kids finance, you need to dig deep and make complex concepts simple enough without losing the meaning of it. All right. Now, this links to the 3rd webinar takeaway of building capacity through collaborations. Now, the example that I've just mentioned and what we are doing today, it's in a practical way one of the things that I need to get to when I'm teaching kids finance. So if Mary needed this webinar with these concepts alone, which she would have been able to do it as my colleague, and so is Michelle, she would have needed to probably have 3 months and use more resources, allocate more time and financial resources for this webinar that we're about to end. And the same as myself. If I needed to have a webinar across the Atlantic and across the world, the same effort and resources will have been needed. But by collaborating, the 3 of us, we've been able to achieve in a very short space of time something that will have taken us longer and more costlier. So it's very critical to understand that as organizations and individuals, we all have our strengths, we all have our weaknesses. Let's collaborate to bring a sustainable value, which is the 4th one. And maybe value not only for organizations, for you as an individual first, however you define value in your context. Let's create value for our livelihoods and for our future, for our families, and then value for our teams. Because if you create value for your teams, you're almost guaranteed that it's infectious. The organization will be sustainable. So those are the 4 takeaways that we would like to let you take home from this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the poll has ended. We do have, I think maybe if there's one question, in the interest of time, we don't have time for many. But if there's one question, if you want to put that in the chat, would love to hear from you all. As you all are thinking of that one question, the contact information for each of the speakers, I've listed here on the slide as well as in the chat. If you thought this information was valuable and you would like to stay connected with the presenters, their LinkedIn information is also included in the chat because they would love to stay connected with you. And I would say, just my thought here is this is really the start of the dialogue. This is the beginning of the dialogue, beginning of the discussion, beginning of the learning. Really the takeaway is A, in the application, but B, in having further discussions so you can reach out to both of our panelists to have more in-depth conversations. As I mentioned before at the start of this, as you were going through and doing your own evaluation and realizing based on some of the content that you learned today, that there are gaps in what you are doing versus kind of the recommendation moving into the future and being more sustainable. Do not try to solve this on your own. You've got these subject matter experts who are here to support you and your business, you and your leadership as you talk about moving your business forward, elevating and being more profitable as we move into 2021 and beyond. So please don't try to work in a box, try to do this on your own, try to figure it out, leverage the experts who are here to help you because you can tell they are very passionate about these topics. They are very knowledgeable about these topics. And more than anything else, they want to pour into you so that you can succeed in your business. So with that being said, I will let you all close. Are there any final comments that you would like to share with our audience here? Or would you like to share the poll? Let me know what you would like to do. We'll make sure we close it out.
Yeah, Mary can go first.
Yes, let's close it out, Michelle, because I'm aware people need to go. But first, Michelle, I want to say thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to brag a little bit on you. For those people that are looking for a coach, executive, professional, leadership, Michelle is your go-to person. I have watched her. I've been encouraged by her. I've been challenged. And she just is an epitome of professionalism. So thank you for being a part of what we are building here. We look forward to collaborating further with you. Mayor, thank you very much for trusting me. This started a few months ago, or even a few weeks ago. Here we are, we've done it. And to our audience, thank you very much for trusting us with your time and just listening to us and being a part of this. We hope that we'll see you next time. Again, if you're looking for leadership, customer management, customer centricity, customer experience, please don't hesitate to reach out. Mayor, off to you.
Thank you, partners and colleagues. I really want to thank each and every one of you on the 15th of December who came here in the afternoon, South African time. It's still in the morning in the US and Canada. But I want to thank each one, all of you, at the middle of festive season, who came here to share this conversation with us. Very, very thank you to you. Michelle, I can't add or remove anything that Mary said. And what the audience don't know, thanks you for joining us at a very short space of time. You are part of the team. This is very enjoyable what we're starting here. And Mary, as we have said, we're starting a very long journey of transforming nations for the better. That's the purpose. So the three of us, Michelle, Mary, what we want to do, we want to see the society of the future being competent, being supported, being profitable, being sustainable. That's the journey and the purpose that we want to help you achieve while we achieve it for ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to this webinar. Again, the information for the speakers is in the chat, so make sure that you stay connected with them on LinkedIn as well as on their websites, or you can email them if you have questions. You all have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you.